All right, so we're going to leave 2022 and we're going to leap forward to 2027. So for those of you who haven't been to an Upfront before, we think this format works really well because in Wayne's panel, you could tell we were talking a lot about the here and now, what's going on in this year's market. We'll see a year later if it really worked out that way. But what we're trying to do here with this discussion is to look at the near future, not too far out where anything can happen, but as we saw with COVID or the recession or, hey, a war, you know, things can really shake things up in the business. Supply chain issues were a big part of that last panel discussion at the end there. So I'd like to introduce my panel, and then I'm going to ask them an opening question about how things look 5 years from now. So we have Jason Kanefsky, who is Managing Partner, Marketplace Intelligence for Havas International?
No,
Havas USA, Havas Media. And then we have Barry Lowenthal, who I'm excited to be here because he is the former CEO of Media Kitchen, and what I like about having him on this panel, in theory, is that he's media neutral. He's not representing any specific clients or any agents. We did, when we first launched the Upfront, we tried doing a panel. We did do a panel of ex-agency people so that they could speak from the heart. So we'll see how much Barry does. Then we have Stacy Stewart, who's the Chief Marketplace Officer of part of Interpublic's IPG Media Brands. And then finally, we have Brad Stockton, who's Senior Vice President, National Video Investments Innovation for Dentsu. So, you know, I want to open up with just your general view of how you think the future of the marketplace looks. And yeah, we're talking about the Upfront, but we're generally talking about the evolution of forward media buying, advanced media buying. To me, the Upfront is just priming the pumps of stimulating the fiscal media buying year. At least that's the way I look at it. And that's why we created the Upfront in terms of getting out in front of the Upfront and talking about the issues. So I'd like to open up and just ask each of you to think, like, how different or how similar will it be 5 years from now? And if you don't mind, we'll just cut across and then I'll ask some follow-ups.
So I actually thought this was the future of programmatic TV panel. So, so all those who were here in 2015, I think we know what happened to the programmatic TV. So when you think about the future, there are really 3 reasons why you have upfronts. And you know, either it's a client initiative where they're trying to get cost certainty, they're trying to land a financial plan, they're trying to ensure certain types of marketing costs are fulfilled. You have agency initiatives because, quite frankly, doing large-scale buying is way more efficient for us than it is to do one-off scatter buying. And then, of course, you have sales initiatives, which is things that are directed against Wall Street, against pricing and planning, ways to control for their inventory in a futures market. So I don't see a world where those 3 initiatives or those 3 strategic agendas don't take place in some way, shape, or form. But what they sell and to whom they sell it to and the mechanism of how it's transacted will clearly be very, very different than it is today. And it will be more of a programmatic format. I think there'll be more levers being pulled, and there'll be less about this idea of it's May 15th, we got to go do a deal.
So the algorithms won. That is the situation. The upfronts represent what, like $20 billion? That's maybe 2 weeks of revenue for the big 3. So the algorithms have won, and media departments in the next 5 years will be replaced by project managers who will manage campaign setup and execution, and the buying algorithms will optimize our campaigns.
Quite a difference here.
I'm going to miss you.
I've already left.
Definitely programmatic is the future. I think we all know that. I think that's not an argument or even a discussion at this point. I think long-term deals still have a role and are definitely a place for the industry and for our clients, and there's a benefit to that. I think eventually we will catch up to the way consumers have changed their viewing patterns and their consumption patterns. Because right now we buy in a very antiquated way and we go to market in a very antiquated way, and we're hopefully catching that up quickly, but I think that's where we'll be.
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination of the two of what was just said there. I just look at it as, yes, algorithm is going to play a huge factor, and automation is going to be instrumental in the future of advertising and how we make our buying decisions. But being able to secure effective, efficient rates is core, and being able to make a forward-facing investment guarantees the right CPM and guarantees the right inventory I want to secure ahead of time. I think that's not going to go away. I think yield management helps the networks as well as us as advertisers knowing how much we need to spend in our forecasting. I can speak at it at an agency level, which is great. We have a whole group of money, but when you break that down to each individual advertiser who has goals and KPIs they need to achieve, that forward-facing investment at each individual advertiser plays such a huge factor in their buying decision. So I think it's exactly the combination of the two. It's not going away, but it's going to be a complete facelift.
Okay, so we opened up with a little bit of tension here, and you were the diplomat, Brad. So, but I'd like to challenge Jason a little bit, because I'm not saying you agree with their intelligence, but Group M recently put out a report estimating that right now $370 billion is spent on what they call AI-enabled media buying, and I think that includes programmatic. By the year 2032, Group M predicts $1.3 trillion, or 90% of all media, will be bought by some form of AI. So this is for Jason, but it's also for the whole panel, which is, do you think in 2027 AI will be negotiating the upfronts?
As long as there's an NFL deal out there, I don't know if AI is going to negotiate the upfronts, but there's no question that all this technology, all this information is being absorbed, whether it's, if you're doing a Google deal, which is primarily driven by AI. So that's a large chunk of it right there. So, we sit here and we've been talking about the death of the upfront for probably 25 years. And for different reasons, we are getting closer to that moment in time. I don't think it's an AI-driven rationale of why the upfront will end. I think it just will, it's moved from being an objective to a strategy to barely a tactic. And with linear starting to decline as quickly, really spiraling out of control, what will remain will be purchased in a programmatic way, which is fundamentally AI.
We can go so many places with that question. So will AI be negotiating the upfront in 5 years? So first off, I counted almost 60 presentations going on now. There's no problem with scarcity. Will we have an upfront in 5 years? Probably not. I don't see why we're going to need it. The only reach that you can buy in television today is sports. So for the most part, you're really just delivering half the universe, right? A lot of women don't watch sports. So we're not really delivering most of the nation through sports. It was amazing. So of the top 50 shows, 45 of them were sports. 2 of them were 60 Minutes, one of which was Nancy Pelosi talking about the insurrection. The other one was Harry and Meghan getting interviewed by Oprah. And then 2 of them were NCIS, I think. So that's about reach in television today. So so in 5 years, we will have AI negotiating our media inventory, and there won't be an upfront.
I agree with that. I don't think there will be an upfront in the traditional sense that we talk about it right now. I think we've largely commoditized programming. Day parts don't exist. It's the consumer's world at this point, and we're just trying to reach them the most effective and efficient way possible.
As the advanced TV guy, I should say there's not going to be an upfront, but I do think there's going to be an upfront. So I think let's just level set with that. I do believe in data-driven linear, full stop. But again, I go back to just the value prop of what it looks like. It's going to be completely different. It is art and science that we do. However you want to chalk it up. The algorithms say are going to tell me to buy overnight. Dope. That's great. Cheap, efficient CPMs. But where am I actually getting my reach and my frequency? You need to complement that across the board. Make sure the algorithm is doing what it's supposed to do. So I actually do see where this is still going to be a factor in some capacity. I think where there's going to be completely different looks at mixes, one fluidity deal across the board. I want to make sure I'm buying my digital video, measuring it the same way as my linear TV, or really my linear TV, like my digital video. Let's flip that on its head. But, you know, I think at the end of the day, it's about let's use data and technology, put it together, but you need people at the helm making sure it's making the smart buying decisions. And at the end of the day, we're talking about a lot of money being transacted. And I think that's really core that we are making sure people are still having a role in that. I think it's imperative.
Yeah, I mean, the key part of that Group M analysis is AI enabled. They weren't saying AI doing it per se, but you know, personally, I do think that's the future of using machines to help people do their jobs better. There's just too much stuff for you guys to consider to do manually like in the old days. How many of you guys still have 400 people in your spot TV buying groups? Okay, but I want to follow up on another point Jason made, which is for 25 years, people have been talking about the death of the upfront. Actually, I'm going to say 40 years because that's how long I've been covering the market. But 25 years ago, David Verklin got on stage at an ANA conference and formed this thing called the Nudge Group, the Network Upfront Discussion Group, because, you know, the upfront is the market that people love to hate, right? And it needs to be reformed. 25 years later, I heard Mark Pritchard get up in front of the ANA just about a month ago and talk about the fact that the upfront needs to be reformed. His thing was likening the upfront, you know, to buying toilet paper because it's crazy that you would stockpile all this inventory because you might need it later. And in particular, he thought the whole guarantee system is totally outdated and that why do we buy this when in digital we're buying in real time based on supply and demand. So I think that's a good one. And 5 years from now, do you foresee Mark Pritchard's vision being fulfilled where we're no longer using this guarantee system?
So I just want to backtrack a little bit on what Verklin was doing 25 years ago. He wasn't saying the upfront should go away. He didn't like the rules of the upfront. And those are two different things. There was the idea.
What actually changed from Nudge?
Right, nothing really changed. But the great Andy Donchin talked about time clocks, that we should have a closing bell 5 o'clock on a Thursday night. We'll see you on Tuesday, whatever it may be. But it wasn't. Nobody was debating whether or not the transaction model of buying long-term media at a set price was a bad idea. It was just the functionality of how we were doing it. So that, to be fair, that was the conversation about the upfront. Today, the conversation about the upfront is this even makes sense from a transactional point of view. But at the end of the day, 5 years from now, I think I would love to see P&G walk away from client guarantees. I think everybody in this room would like to see P&G. Raise your hand if you want P&G to walk away from client guarantees, from currency guarantees. I mean, that's of course they would. I don't know why anybody would say that out loud, to be perfectly honest. But ROI is becoming more important than CPM guarantees. Understanding how your media is working with other parts of your marketing conversation is more important than audience guarantees. But fundamentally, the transaction requires that there's an investment being made that somebody's accountable for it. And we talk about 14 different currencies in the marketplace right now. Which is the most accountable is the one we're going to replace or use Nielsen.
Yeah, so completely agree with you.
Thank God.
So as you guys were talking, I was thinking back to like when audience guarantees sort of first started, right? So way back when, we would estimate what a schedule would deliver using Nielsen, and we wouldn't know that that schedule delivered that audience until way after the schedule ran, which is why we would do, God, what were they called?
Estimates?
Not estimates.
Make goods?
When we would reconcile the
Discrepancy resolution.
Thank you. And so we would do all of that, and then we would go back and we would say, okay, we need all this ADUs, right, to make up for this audience guarantee. So, we needed to have audience guarantees then because we just had no idea whether we were delivering what we promised we would until months later. But now we do know pretty quickly whether we're delivering what we said we were going to deliver, right? So we don't need audience guarantees the way that we had them before. If we can optimize fairly quickly, we just don't need that kind of those kinds of guarantees. So, long story short, will we be transacting against audience guarantees in 5 years from now? Not the way we used to do it. Probably more like we've been doing it now in digital.
To be fair, I think half the room still owes me inventory. So
Half the room what?
still owes me inventory from deals that aren't delivered. Yes.
Ditto.
By the way, just like Wayne prompted you, think about questions. This is an opportunity to find out what's going to happen in the future, so you can predict stock futures from this panel and ask them anything you want. They'll know. Again, I want to follow up with Jason on the fact that things have not really changed much. The thing that, yeah, forward markets make sense in all industries, probably to some degree. And I remember in 1999 when Enron was trying to do a 5-year forward marketplace with NBC. We know where that is today. So it makes sense, but why work in a marketplace where your suppliers allocate their inventory to you? And I didn't have the opportunity to ask this question on Wayne's panel, but I want to ask you all, do you, Barry, you're exempt right now, but do you all register your budgets with the networks, and will you be doing that in 5 years? Before the market starts.
So in 2027, I think you will be working off some sort of a user interface that has nothing to do with the human being, and you will be looking at inventory that you will bid on, and the bid will either be accepted or not accepted based on current market conditions. So you can create forward-looking, private marketplaces within the UI, but I think it's going to be more personalized, more driven by the segments that you're actually bidding against, and you may find yourself losing or winning bids based on nothing to do with audience guarantees or delivery of that specific unit. It's the delivery of that specific unit against your specific audience segmentation that's going to drive the price. So it's going to be a very personalized marketplace.
So like basically PMPs.
I think so. Yeah.
So that's why I think PGs are going to play a large factor both in the current upfronts in the digital streaming space, but then also in the long term as TV becomes more biddable in nature and platforms start playing a factor. That's what's going to make things extremely interesting on why I will be able to put X% towards a fixed CPM and Y towards a biddable CPM. This way I can optimize towards that audience, but I still need my base. To your point, yes, linear TV ratings are wildly down. Reach can still be driven on linear television and then complemented and extended with the additional channels, a true omni-channel mix to maximize your reach. But linear TV still plays a factor in that. So I think when we pair that together, I think you still want some sort of base to know what you're going to deliver against. I think the bigger question we have, or the thing we need to solve for, are antiquated MMM reports that saying a low base CPM is going to be the best move. I want an eCPM, an effective CPM. Correct. What is what am I willing to pay to reach that audience that's going to drive my business? That is what the core really comes back to.
Yeah, so I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think the key is when one day we wake up and it's not linear that's driving reach, it's the other way around. When streaming starts to drive the reach, that will change the mindset of so many advertisers as they go forward.
It's a really good, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think I agree with you both completely. I think the biggest challenge in that is MMM hasn't kept up with a lot of consumption and measurement at this point. And until that catches up, we're not going to see that mass change.
So your answer is no, you won't be registering your budgets with the networks in 5 years, okay?
Well, really quickly, because it's really interesting, though, if you look at what the networks are and what the networks are becoming, they're becoming streaming partners. So now it's just a holistic video. So are we still need to make sure we're securing our inventory on the Disney Pluses, the Hulus, the Peacocks, the Paramount Pluses, and what does that look like? And how they used to say, okay, well, buy my TV, but you have to have some digital. Buy my digital, now you have to have some TV. So I think as we look over the next 4 or 5 years, how those conversations are going to start to change a lot as we bring more data, technology, and automation to the space.
Okay, so already things have become much more fungible than when I first started covering it. The word TV is still there, but what will we be calling this medium in 5 years?
Video.
I mean, we're calling it video now, to be fair.
Exactly.
As we move into this new Web3 type of era, the metaverse, do you see those things morphing into this cross-media marketplace, or will those always be treated differently?
Look at that, Barry.
Give that to me. So I read this article in Vice, and it talked about these people in the Philippines, cheap labor, who were creating JPEGs and turning them into NFTs, and getting paid like $1,000 for a JPEG. I mean, it was just crazy kind of money that they were just churning out. So why do I share this? So I think that we should all figure out how to mint JPEGs really quickly and ride this gravy train so we don't have to worry about this conversation anymore.
Well said.
Well, we started on that road, so let's continue with a little bit of Web3. But so let me ask you a couple of quick lightning round questions so we could get through this. So, what will be the basis of? We already heard on Wayne's panel that the currency is being thrown up in the air. We have alternates. It'll be some time before it shakes out. But I want to ask you all. By 2027, what will be the standard currency for the 27-28 marketplace? Nielsen, alternate currency, Bitcoin, NFTs, toilet paper, or Russian rubles?
So working backwards, I think we can eliminate Russian rubles. I think the currency that we will be buying against doesn't even exist right now, because I don't think the technology that we're talking about it will fundamentally answer the questions we'll be asking in 2027, 2028. So I think it's going to be a combination of some sort of ACR plus I don't want to say T-Vision, because but a T-Vision-like model where we're getting an understanding of what's happening in the home without necessarily being as intrusive as T-Vision may be considered. But it's going to be a full measurement of the glass, and plus some form of there's a company called Google owns a company called TensorFlow, which Dan Thomas introduced me to, and they have some very interesting technology which I think can be expanded into a larger conversation about measurement in the home.
I feel like, Joe, for years we've been talking about the importance of moving away from a GRP, which is just an opportunity for exposure to outcomes. And I mean, everything that you would, all those currencies that you're kind of talking about have some sort of outcome consequence kind of inferred in how they're built. I was talking to a startup recently who is developing a micro payment platform for content creators that lives on the blockchain. And the idea there is, if you can write it on the blockchain, then you can, with a high degree of certainty, know that exposure ran, or that content ran, and therefore the creator is due some money. And in my head, that becomes a really interesting way to also measure media, because if you know that somebody earned money, you know that it had to run someplace. And all of a sudden, then it becomes a Nielsen killer, right? And so I do think that there's going to be a lot of innovation within blockchain technology to allow us to have a better degree of certainty that something ran, that something was seen, and very much who saw it. So I think that's going to be really, really interesting where that's going to go.
How do you all feel about the idea that smart contracts will secure your deal, and that it'll all be automated, that once those impressions are rendered, the payments will be made, and there'll be less human interaction and haggle?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to happen that way.
Please.
Yeah.
All right, one more kind of lightning roundish question. So,
Can we talk about Netflix?
yeah.
Oh, I wrote a whole piece on that. Yes, go ahead.
So, the other panel was saying how, and I'm paraphrasing here, that, and Netflix coming out with advertising is a good thing. And I guess my question is, the first thing that came to my mind was, when did more advertising ever become a good thing? And, we argue about frequency capping. Do you remember when the World Wide Web started taking banners, and then all of a sudden we all had banner blindness? And now you go to these web pages and it's like one pollution site after another pollution site. And click-through rates, nobody clicks on banners, right? So when did more advertising become a good thing? So I worry that with Netflix selling advertising now, at the end of the day, it's going to be a net negative for this business, for this industry. And I do think that it's sort of like this larger existential crisis around what's happening with this business. I don't think, advertising supported streaming platforms are what we need. I think that we have a much better user experience when we don't have ads. So really we need to be thinking about how do we create money and a better user experience without putting more advertising into the marketplace.
Well, I fundamentally disagree with that. I said I fundamentally disagree with that.
Let's do it.
How much time do we have? You guys want to start and I'll follow up, but
Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't
it sounded nice though.
respectfully, I mean, disagree. I mean, I don't
You don't
think-
have to do respect.
He's out of the business.
No, I think, listen, the reality is it's not that having more ad-supported content is bad. It's just how we do our ad-supported can be bad. I think there's a difference between the two. I think what happened in linear television is the value prop of advertising throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and today, that was fun to say, is that we lost the value of what the exchange was. We are putting this advertising content in front of you so that the owners of these networks and channels can make great premium content. And that value exchange has been lost by adding 5 minutes of ad time per pod break, and that's a problem. So when we think about what are these streaming platforms going to look like, let's go make sure that if we're creating an ad environment, that it's a beneficial to the consumer and that it's a great consumer experience. So if they do that right, this is a great opportunity for advertisers. Now, what is that then going to be the value exchange on the cost? Because there are less ads. What is that going to look like? That's a whole different conversation. But I don't think this is a net bad thing for the industry. I think it's that if we do it right, we can be very successful. No, I'm not pitching for the job.
No, and I agree with you completely. I think if we look at ad loads, they're out of control at this point. I can walk my dog during a linear commercial break. Like literally, I can take my dog out and come back and not miss anything. Like that's insane. I don't think it's about Netflix having ads. I think it's about having the right amount of ads and the right relevant consumer interaction that makes it compelling for that value exchange.
I guess I just believe, like, if history is any indication, I just don't think we do ad loads very well. Like, we screw it up all the time. So, like, why do we think that just because it's Netflix, we're going to do a better job? I mean, maybe we will. I hope we will. I mean, I love Netflix. I'm rooting for them. Yeah, I just worry that the more advertising we put in the marketplace, the worse it is for all of us.
So I would just say that I have 2 kids, and they will be on the AVOD Netflix gravy train as soon as humanly possible, because I am tired of paying for their subscriptions. So, but I think that's a big part of it. If we want great content, which we all want, I mean, that's fundamentally what we want our consumers and our users to have is great content, it has to be supported by one of 2 or 3 ways. And the subscription model is, we're already, CNBC came out with an article the other day, and I've seen it in other places, subscription fatigue is a real thing. And you start doing the math, and especially if we can't share passwords. And my kids were selling my passwords, never mind sharing. But that's a whole other conversation. But that said, the great content costs a tremendous amount of money, and it has to be paid for, and has always been paid for by the collective universe of advertisers, clients, and agencies. And I don't think that ever changes.
Yeah, I don't think AVOD equals clutter. What we've done with linear TV is bad, but isn't this really about incremental reach? The fact that, in the old cable days, it was about reaching the under-delivery, right? Targeting those people you couldn't get through broadcast. Same thing here. How do you reach the people who are untethered, who are on subscription video services? The best deal in town probably is getting a branded product placement deal on HBO now because you have a pure environment. These are big questions, but I think show of hands, by 2027, do you think Netflix will be sullied like a linear TV environment?
I think more like a Hulu environment, not a linear TV environment. But it's a $2 billion deal.
Yeah, hopefully not Peacock AVOD. That one sucks, but.
Clearly not a sponsor. Okay.
Okay, so we talked about PMPs earlier. I think that's an interesting analogy from digital programmatic into linear, into what we call video now. But one of the interesting innovations I've seen in the last few years, all your agencies have done this, has been inclusion markets, where you've set up PMPs to target underserved audiences, whether they were minority or gender or, I'm trying to think, mostly it's been ethnic. But I want to ask you, what do you think will be the next new inclusion marketplace 5 years from now? I have some ideas.
Space.
If Elon Musk has his say.
It's a tough question. I think we're really trying to touch a lot of the diversity and inclusion at this point. We've moved from, looking at Black-owned and Black audiences to LGBTQ plus. We've looked at minority, veteran-owned. We've looked at So if we've cast a pretty wide net, I don't know what the next thing is. I think it's about shifting the mindscape that media can do good is important for all of us, and how can we look at that from a sustainability factor, from a diversity and inclusion factor, from a supporting quality news factor. Like, how can we make sure that our media dollars are supporting good in the world is going to remain and can be consistent even 5 years from now, if not an even bigger factor.
So my prediction is it won't be Asian Americans, it won't be neurodiversity, it won't be extraterrestrials, it will be rich white men, because we'll have excluded them completely. And Elon Musk will save that one. But
No, but just, I mean, what Stacy said, I think, is so incredibly important. And just for a second, so, you know, we know, right, that we show up to a lot of social media. Most of the media that we spend time with makes us feel worse about ourselves, not better. And that's a real problem, isn't it? The fact that the places that we go to engage our customers, where we go to do marketing, makes us feel like shit. And so we, as advertisers, need to take responsibility for the messages that we put out there in the marketplace, because that's the only thing that we can control, right? If we show up to places and it makes us feel bad, the thing that we can control is what we say, because what we say can make people feel good. And that's kind of what you're talking about. And I do think that we owe it to our clients, we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our kids, we owe it to our democracy to take responsibility for the messages that we put out there. And maybe that is the next big Uber, you know, DEI initiative, which is not necessarily individuals, but it's feelings. And are we supporting each other, and are we doing the things that make us feel better?
it's a serious question then. There's this science known as neuroprogrammatic now, which is using the neuroscience to target people programmatically. Cambridge Analytica was probably the most famous example of this, used in a bad way, right? Where they took sentiment data from Facebook users and targeted their hate and their anger and other things. But it's being used today. I mean, Mindshare has a whole neuroscience division, and they're trying to align message with audience. Sometimes they found in their research that putting a positive ad in a negative environment really works well. One of the best places to put an ad for attentiveness is after, you know, something scared the crap out of people, because their brains are open. Should we be screwing with people's brains, and do you think in 5 years this science will become the norm and more of a standard, or not so much?
I mean, it's always been about content, context, and putting everything together, using as much data and science as we can to make the best buying decisions. I don't know if I'm in the mindset of trying to screw with people's brains to like make them think they should be buying my product. I think utilizing data to identify who are my core users and consumers, and making them at the core to put my advertisements in the contextual relevant place, and using data technology to inform that. But neuroscience and going that far down the rabbit hole in 5 years, you know, it's a risky road. We saw what happened with Cambridge Analytica with, you know, to quote Spider-Man, with great powers comes great responsibility. And I think we have to be responsible as advertisers to make sure that we don't let it go down that rabbit hole again, ever again.
I mean, look, we're not going to shut down Instagram, right? So we're going to continue to hurt the mental health of teen girls. And if we're going to continue to do that and fund that, then I think we should do things like neuroscience and know at least that we're killing our kids. So let's tell them good things about them so that maybe we can save them. And if neuroscience does that, all the more power to it.
It can definitely be used to help people, but in the end, you got to move a widget. You have to sell a product. And isn't the ROI the most important KPI?
No, you mean, okay, there are KPIs and there's ROI, and there are all kinds of different conversations. But first of all, this panel took a very dark turn. I don't know if anybody else noticed that but me. But that said, you know, clients and brands, like think about Unilever and P&G and other great brands, they understand that creating ROI at the expense of their consumers doesn't actually drive value long term. You know, brand sustainability and being meaningful is becoming more and more important every day, you know, to the success of these companies. We do studies every year on the meaningfulness of brands, and every year we see that if a brand, more and more brands can disappear and nobody would care. So the way out of that for brands is not an ROI KPI, it's a meaningfulness KPI. And, you know, to everybody's point about, you know, neurotransmitting, whatever that was, you know, the idea of bringing bringing good into the world is a very important message now for almost every single brand.
Yeah, Jason's referring to Havas's meaningful brand study, which I think is some of the best proprietary research in the industry. Why don't you guys open source that and give it to everybody to use in their programmatic? Anyway.
Jason?
Yes, come see me after the meeting.
So if anyone has questions about what the world will look like in 5 years, now's a good time to raise your hand. I'll look around, think about it. I'll come back. We kind of started touching on brand safety there, and I'm wondering how, it looks like we've really made huge advances in the past 5, 6, 7 years. One of the things I'm starting to see now is sustainability. I think all your agencies have big sustainability programs, but I've actually started seeing programmatic, but also just media buying opportunities where you can do carbon offsets. You can now buy green media opportunities that both the process of buying the media consumes less energy, and also the ads are associated with carbon offsets. How big a thing do you think that will be over the next 5 years, or is that a fad?
I don't think it's a fad. I think it's a reality that we're living in, and sustainability is going to be a bigger factor each year. I think it's a big factor now. We're looking at what can we do as a company, again, going back to that media can do good in the world. How can we make sure that our media is helping that sustainability efforts? I don't think it's a fad. I think it's definitely something that's going to increase. We're just getting started with that.
Yeah, you've said it twice now, and I think you're spot on. We could do good with advertising dollars, and I think that goes back to what you're saying about is ROI the most important KPI? Sure, within reason, it's the most important KPI while doing good, making sure you're not looking at the other factors at what we can do and impact as advertisers, as brands that can do good for this world. So I love that line. I could not agree more. It's far from a fad. It's the new way of working, and it's how we need to be thinking moving forward and thinking about what are the additional things we can do good in this world as advertisers.
Anybody for 5 years? Is there a question back there? Please introduce yourself.
Will Danielson, Nexstar Digital. I've heard you guys talk about the future of the way you guys are doing media buying more in the programmatic sense. What I haven't heard is where 5G and ATSC 3.0 play in the linear space of that programmatic buy. And we've been talking about this for 10, 15 years in the industry. So the question is, how far away is it? Is it reality, or is it more just something kind of like a unicorn?
So, I mean, I'll just talk quickly about 5G because I spent a little time thinking about it. Last year when AT&T was still owned HBO Max, the idea of quicker, better streaming, more broadband, and Netflix talked about this a little bit. That as broadband slowed down, it actually hurt their business as well. That you just need more. I think at one point Netflix was consuming something like 20% of all the broadband that was out there on any given night. So as 5G develops, streaming gets stronger, gets faster, gets quicker, gets better. So it will. I mean, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that will continue the shift of linear programming, and cable programming into a different environment, which will then fundamentally change what consumers are available and where they're watching it, which will then change how we buy media.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a really good point, right? What is the new set-top box in 5 years from now? The set-top box in 5 years from now is your smart TV. So now it's an app-based game, whereas Osprey that's coming out with AT&T boxes or what Comcast is doing with theirs. So like when we think about what is the future of advertising, where 5G and all the advancements on that is going to come is how are you actually getting your content? Is it going to be all app-based? And then that the MVPD is Vizio and LG and Samsung, which changes the entire dynamics of how we're actually looking at that. And then also what are local breaks now? What does that actually look like? And then that's where programmatic can play a larger factor in 5 years from now when you already have those set up versus a set-top box trying to make a biddable linear TV ad. What does a Masso and Sasso setup look like that today versus 5 years from now? That's what will be enabled as those advancements happen across the board. And it's not really on the outside of the countries of the issue. It's really getting the infrastructure set up throughout the middle of our country to then make it enabled across the board. That's what 5 years from now is going to look like. So we'll have better streaming across the entire country.
Yeah, my provider's YouTube TV right now. You know what local breaks look like? Just ambient music for 2 or 3 minutes. I'm looking forward to seeing commercials again.
I mean, that's where it gets super interesting, right? Because when you think about like the YouTube TVs or the Hulu's TVs of the world, it's the linear TV stream, and then you're dynamically inserting into the local breaks where, okay, so who needs to be buying that? Does P&G need to buy that on top of what they're buying linearly? So who should be tapping into that? What is the right price exchange for that? And where are we actually going to get that? Is it just part of YouTube Select Buy, or is that going to eventually be an open biddable market into those local breaks? But then how are you going to manage frequency across the board when that comes to fruition? And that's where it gets really interesting, because is the SSII set up to actually know what ad is coming in there to then stitch into the next one? So that's a massive issue we're all looking to solve for.
Back there?
Thanks. Hey, it's Rob Jason from USIM. Can you talk a bit about privacy in 2027? And you know, eventually by then maybe Chrome will have switched off their cookies, possibly. And what you think that the world is going to be like when you know, we have enhanced privacy and we're going to be struggling to maybe use some of that third-party data.
I think privacy is going to be an ongoing battle as technology advances. I think we're never going to have a solve for the privacy answer. I think it's always going to constantly evolve as technology changes. I think consumers have gotten used to the value exchange. Most of them know they're exchanging their data in exchange for the content at this point. How we manage and protect that privacy is just going to be a constant evolution.
Yeah, I mean, I think privacy is an asset, and it's something I'm going to sell. There'll be some sort of exchange where I can go. Probably there'll be some sort of app on my smartphone that, you know, calculates how much I'm actually making every time I give you something. But I do think that privacy overall will be some sort of asset that I trade in. Maybe like, you know, I don't know, another crypto. Yeah.
No, yeah, I think there are already companies that are doing that, but the idea of I will exchange my privacy for free streaming. I mean, you know, it's going to become it can very well become a currency that, you know, becomes, you know, exchangeable for things that you're not willing to pay for, but you actually want. But the nice part about as people, you know, pull their privacy back, it actually creates the opportunity to buy national scale on some of these highly targeted networks like Facebook that we said, you know what, I'm gonna use this for precision, and you go from precision to scale, and that, you know, in the absence of a marketplace that actually has any real scale to it at this point, it does create a new opportunity for clients to think differently in 5 years.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is I think we need to get to some sort of federal regulation. These individual states having all different rules and regulations that we have to bounce around, whether it's the New Jersey law, what's going on in Vegas, what's going on in CCPA. I think we have to get to some better standardization so we can properly navigate it regardless, but I couldn't agree more. I think that there's going to be more value exchange there, but I think we really need to focus in down at Washington and get that right from an advertising standpoint, what privacy really means and how we're utilizing it in our day-to-days.
Any more? We have 5 minutes. So, I mean, there's so many areas. I could do a whole panel on privacy or any of these things we talked about. I'm not sure what to wrap up on now, but one of the things I'm excited about in this year's Upfront is that IPG Media Brands is going to use NewsGuard's content ratings for the first time ever in news networks and programming. And I'm just wondering how much all of you, I know you can't speak proprietary about it, but how much all of you see the role of putting ad dollars into supporting safe, legitimate content and keeping it away from the unsavory parts of the world?
I think this is it's a huge area of focus for me personally. We've done a lot of work with NewsGuard in partnership. We wanted a neutral third party that could really look at the responsible journalism in the marketplace and what are we putting out there. And I think we see a lot of conversations around right-wing, left-wing, and it's not really about that. It's about accuracy and responsibility. And how can we shift the conversation to that accuracy and responsibility and away from the right and left conversation? I don't really care if it's right or left. I care if it's correct. Mm-hmm. And NewsGuard's going to allow us to, we're using it heavily in digital space right now. We do have a proprietary deal to do it in linear TV, which is exciting for us. And it definitely looking to hold people accountable for the messages that they're putting in the marketplace. And we want our clients and us to support those places because a key to our democracy, as you said, is supporting that journalism and that ethics and that moral responsibility.
Can I get you just to comment on how they rate Tucker Carlson's testicles? Sorry.
I will say some of the ratings are interesting and and not surprising. And we have it on network levels, we have it on program levels, so we are dissecting what that looks like right now, which in time to use for the Upfront, which is exciting.
I'm excited. Anybody else on the future of basically authenticating content and putting your money behind? I'm not talking about MRC rated, I'm talking about veracity ratings.
I didn't know that you guys were doing that. I think it's fantastic. Congratulations. I think that's a great, good for you.
I would think meaningful brands would be all over that.
So we are all over that. We have something called CAN. You know, everybody looks at you know. I think Barry mentioned it before about you know, toxicity of certain places, you know, and Instagram, and there's no question that news, the way it's presented today, in most cases, is toxic, and it drives ratings sometimes. Sometimes it actually doesn't, but it is doing nothing to help us as a country move forward. And we're heading into the midterms in, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, and the amount of money that will be spent, not just, you know, on political ads, which will be toxic, but the amount of time spent by, you know, the 3 major cable networks talking about the midterms and creating that environment that doesn't necessarily, you know, represent us well as a country, will be extraordinary. So I applaud you guys for doing that, because the only way to make change is to put your money where your mouth is, and I think that's great. And you know, it's, you know, Havas, we have a similar, we may not have that same technology, but we have a similar view, and we are acting against that.
Okay, well, I don't think we solved the death of the Upfront yet, but I see a lot of positive changes in the next 5 years, so I want to thank our panel for bringing us a step into the future. Hopefully a lot of that will come to fruition. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.